9/11 opened all of our eyes to the fact that there could be sleeper cells of terrorists living among us, waiting and planning to attack or blow something up. Showtime tackles that subject in its series Sleeper Cell, which is back for a second season. Today, Henri Lubatti, one of the stars of the show, is here. Great to have you here today, Henri.
Yeah, it's good to be here, Gregory. Thank you.
Well, this is definitely a subject that is just ripped right from the headlines. And I think initially after 9/11, people were a little unsure how to tackle this subject or what to do. But now you see it more and more in TV shows and films. And you're back for your second season with this.
That's right. I think I agree. I think that immediately following 9/11, it was hard to figure out what to do. I think there was even a whole period of time where comics were trying to figure out how they could tell jokes properly and deal with just even humor, I think, and entertainment in general sort of worked its way back into telling stories about this. Although I don't know that the storytelling ended. I think that it just took a different tack. There was a lot of first-person accounts. There was a lot of learning about individuals, victims, or people involved. So we had a lot of sort of storytelling, I think, as a culture and as a society that was going on, and it just takes on different forms.
Sure. Well, in another interview, I heard you say something like, raising the question of whether it was exploiting the subject by doing a show about it. But yet, on the other hand, you could just say that it's a way of maybe dealing with it, or...
I think so, yeah, absolutely. It's sort of getting people's thoughts and concerns and anxieties about certain subjects, or perhaps desires to, in fact, see things from a different perspective, a fictional one, or slightly based on reality. I think they're just different ways, and that's been culturally going on for, well, centuries of this kind of storytelling, and I think, and exploiting in the good sense our desire to learn more about a certain subject, or to see things from a perspective that we perhaps as just a bystander might not have the opportunity to otherwise.
Right, and certainly there are plenty of shows about crime in general.
Absolutely.
CSI, everything, CSI,
and not,
North
not to
America.
Exactly, not to dismiss the fact that it is entertainment ultimately. I mean, we look for television to entertain on a certain level too, and so I don't think it's all high intended, but I think that there's a level, particularly with this show, that is really substantial, and I'm very proud of my involvement with it.
So the basic premise is there's a sleeper cell operating in Los Angeles?
That's right. I mean, that was ultimately the first installment of it. It's a mini-series the first time it came out in December of '05, and then that's what the idea was, that there's a sleeper cell in Los Angeles and an undercover FBI agent who has managed to infiltrate the sleeper cell. He himself is a practicing devout Muslim who has his own sort of battle internally with kind of his role within this investigation, and also the effect that this the extremist sort of terrorist group, I mean in this particular case, in the way that they've, as he puts it, hijacked this religion and are exploiting it for their own violent causes. And so there's that very interesting, I think, dynamic there too.
And your character is?
Ilya is his character, my character's name. He's a Bosnian, and he was involved, he was young in the Balkans in the early 90s and lost his family to the conflicts that were going on there, and was, I suppose, ripe for the picking when there was some sort of extremists that moved through, and the story goes on in the first season to reveal that, in fact, the head, Farik, played by Oded Fair, was there in the Balkans and was able to sort of recruit, among others, Ilya, and brought him into this and convinced him of the righteousness of his ways, and then from there pulled him into the sleeper cell, and that's where he finds himself. Throughout the series, there's a sense that this character has some history that isn't perhaps quite as, well, he's got some history and some backstory that might or may not come into play in terms of his willingness to go along with everything, but he early on anyway seems very, very willing, more than willing, and a pretty good militant.
And how easy or hard is it for you to relate to that kind of character?
It's certainly not difficult to relate to this notion of someone looking for family and looking for a place and looking for some kind of security and identity after having lost so much. I think that was the premise that they sort of started from, the writers Ethan Reef and Cy Voris, the creative team behind Sleeper Cell. They brought this character, and I sort of felt really fortunate to be able to play this part. And it was easy, actually, in that sense, to relate, because I think for myself anyway, and I think for actors, it's fun to have something that has some kind of history and a little bit of meat to it.
Sure.
Having said that, there's another side to it that isn't particularly familiar to me, and a level of hate and violence. And that's, I don't know how to, I'm not sure if it's
So you're
difficult
not
or
a terrorist,
hard.
you just play
No,
one on
exactly, I
TV.
just play one on television.
Okay.
I don't know that it's difficult or hard as much as it's a different facet and something that I guess I would have to look at. I look at differently, and I don't know that I can relate to it in any particular way. But it's fascinating, and it's to think someone can go to that extreme, and it's, I'm into it. I'm into the challenge of bringing that to life.
So what kind of research or did you do for this role?
There's a fair amount available to us right away from the beginning. We had Arabic advisors, Muslim advisor right away from the minute we were cast for the pilot that was advising us on pronunciation for prayers and also just cultural issues. We had, there were advisors for the military, for anything to do with law enforcement. There was less of that for my character, but still. And then lots of books and literature. I mean, there's plenty to read about the Balkans, about the struggle there. I had resources in terms of Bosnian, the language, from a good friend, someone who became a good friend, and he was a tremendous resource to me personally for that. And it constantly throughout the writing process, the writers themselves are doing a tremendous amount of research and availing themselves and that research to us, the actors, anytime we needed or asked for it.
And is it hard to, well, okay, so you have the, let's say, I don't know, the technical research or your homework done,
Right.
but let's say, I don't know, emotionally or psychologically, how can you, is it hard to relate to that kind of a character or a person doing that, or how do you get inside the character, you know, once you've done the meat and bones research, or is that what gets you inside it?
I think that's exactly right. I mean, for me, that's how it works. Just having done that research and having sort of lived it for a little while or kind of thought about it, it just sort of happens. I can't say that I can break it down and say that, and again, it's not a question of hard or difficult. I look at it as a challenge, I suppose, of just doing what I do, but it was great. I mean, it was great because there was an abundance of information, and the stories, I think, were really well written and interesting, and as a result, it was a pleasure to try to put it together episode after episode.
So there's not a particular incident in your life that you have to relate it to, or, you know, I know there are different theories or schools about acting, but I just wondered if there's any...
No, although, I mean, certainly there was a fair amount of information about this. I mean, definitely in this country after 9/11, and also, and since, the news coverage, the media coverage of just worldwide incidents and the politics surrounding that, and the cost to human life and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of that going around and available, and it influences, and I think my reaction to that sort of helped me interpret kind of what the audience's perspective on all this might be, and I sort of used it all. But there wasn't one particular thing that I could think of now that was applicable in a particular way.
Well, I realize terrorism is a more politically charged subject than a lot of characters, but in general, you'll hear people say that it's more fun to play the bad guy than the good guy.
Yeah.
So is it more fun to play the bad guy?
I've played the bad guy a few times, and they certainly, I mean, I've worn nice shoes, driven nice cars, and
Your manager, by the way, pointed out to me that you like in one, was it 24? You were
24,
even
that's
an
right.
assassin, a
That's
murderer. In fact, you play the bad guy a lot, right?
I have actually. I paid the rent playing the bad guy. I've had the opportunity to play actually a variety of roles, which has been great. But the bad guys are fun on a lot of levels. It depends sometimes, sort of the point of the show, the nature of the show, and I think this particular show looks at things in such a slightly raw way and a fairly well-rounded way that it's less. As you said, I think there are some heavy moments, and it's not just a caricature of villain, which can be great. But I think that's one thing I really enjoyed about the process. It felt like the characters were fairly complex and well-rounded, and although they have extreme qualities when it comes to that negative side, they have a variety of other opportunities or situations that they're put into in the scripts that are interesting to play as well.
How realistic of a portrayal of, well, let's say terrorism or sleeper cell do you think it is?
I think it's fairly real. I think it's extremely realistic. I think that it's difficult to know for sure because we don't have a sense of, there's still a lot to be learned about, I suppose, how sleeper cells operate and how the network works. And it is a complete decentralized system, so there's no sort of handbook that really explains in great detail. But the information that they're getting is, it's from a lot of technical, the advisors are experts in their fields, and I have to think that they have more information than I do. The way that the show is structured, I think also tends to bring that out, that kind of realism, just because that they try to stick to circumstances and situations that they feel kind of factually somehow in either actual events or in things that they have some information about. And it allows them, and I think the structure of the show allows them to exploit that really well, because it's about that. I mean, it's about kind of how is this all going down, as it were. So I think that they can sort of play along those lines. Having said that, it's an exciting story, it's entertainment, and there's a level of fictionalization in just bringing these particular characters who don't actually exist, of course. And in that, it's hard to say, that's anybody's guess. If you sit down and watch a show and feel like I relate, I can understand the choices made by these individuals. The gadgetry is kept to a fair minimum, so I think that at that point it's really just a subjective feeling of storytelling, and that's something that we all have our own expertise on, I suppose.
We'll be right back with Henri Lubatti from Sleeper Cell. And we are back with Henri Lubatti from Sleeper Cell. Well, one thing that, again, the sensitivity of terrorism and you know, what a major issue for the whole world these days. One thing you wonder is, could a show like this give people ideas? Not that they don't have plenty of ideas on their own, obviously. Was that a concern of yours or the producers?
No, I don't think so. I mean, having seen the show and been involved with it, I don't see how this show could possibly be any a learner's manual of any kind. But it's interesting. And
so
it's
you're studying them; they're not studying you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the way it's done, it's not just inventing ways to hurt people. I mean, it's dealing with, at least that's the way I perceive it, ways to. It's interpreting what's actually going on. We've seen there's been a tremendous amount of.
Well, the reason I ask that is that I hope I'm quoting the right person here, but I believe it was Joe Esterhaus who said in his recent book that he partly blamed 9/11 on the movies, because he said, you know, nobody would ever have come up with that kind of a crazy scenario of crashing planes into buildings if it hadn't been for the things that you see every time you go to the movie theaters or turn on the TV. What's your reaction to that? Do you think that, you know, some of this pushing the envelope and, you know, blowing everything up, does that kind of make the world a more violent place?
No, I don't think so. I know that airlines have been used in terrorism, I think, from a very long time. They've been
for hijackings, I think, mostly, right?
Absolutely, and the airline is a tool of terrorism, a tool of sort of manipulation, political manipulation through acts of terror has been widely used. I think that I don't know I can't get into the psyche of all that, and I don't know enough about the history of that development. But no, I don't believe that that 9/11 had anything to do with the mass purveyance of violence and explosions in the media. Although there is that, and I don't know that that's not affecting culture and society in other ways. But I don't draw that. I personally wouldn't draw that conclusion. No.
All right. I will say this, and without, you know, agreeing or disagreeing with that, I'll just say that someone quoted, one of the first comments that people said after seeing the planes hit the towers was, it was just like a movie. For better or worse, you know, that was the comment.
Yeah, and I agree with that. It's the same way that when we see a lot, I mean, special effects will now affect to a great degree the way we interpret real life, only because they're becoming so real, and they're becoming, and they're so real that at this point, when you see something extraordinary and completely, almost unbelievable in its grandiosity, in its destructive power, or in its, even other times in its beauty, there's a sense that it is in fact a generated image, because we have seen and have come to accept, I think, as an audience, generated images of extreme beauty or extreme violence. And so when we witness that, or when I witness that, I often have draw that correlation. It's not unusual to look at scenery for me and think of a beautiful painting or something, that there's a sense that it's almost a drop of some kind, that these colors I see in the sky that are right there outside my window have been painted or generated in some artificial way because they're so vibrant and so it's a very sort of bizarre train of thought, but I think it's perhaps a function, in fact, of the technology and the advances we've made. So I don't know that I'm not sure, I remember having that thought, and I don't think it was because I felt that there was it reminded me of it was just that there was no other way to process the imagery except as a fabricated image. And I've seen images fabricated in film that were just as realistic as a result. So it was maybe a safe place to go intellectually and think, well, my
Do
brain
you
doesn't
think
work.
maybe that it desensitizes people, though, that if you see that on the screen, that in a way, that even if it is CGI,
Right.
you become used to seeing it, and so it's less shocking in real life? Or
I know.
maybe more like
I know I can understand the sort of the premise behind that. I'm not sure. It'd be interesting. I feel like there was a fairly extreme reaction to what everyone saw that day, and people tend to have fairly bold reactions to images of pain when they're faced with them in real life. Is any more than the news media does. It's a lens, and it's a way to bring something far away close or to create an image. But I don't know that it ultimately desensitizes. And I'm not in. I mean, I have no idea. I'm not in a position to do any kind of that. I mean, to say anything about that, because I'm sure that people are doing plenty of research on it. But I don't think so. I think what we become desensitized to as a society is more just creatively and artistically what we come to accept as entertainment or as interesting or as compelling storytelling. There may be a desensitizing to that sort of thing, so that increasing amounts of violence become synonymous with increasing excitement or compelling storytelling. And I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing or true, or where one wants to go artistically. And that's where I think there may be more of an effect ultimately. But in terms of our empathy or sympathy as human beings, I hope not, and I don't think so.
Yeah, when I watched the CNN coverage again recently, or actually for me for the first time, because I didn't watch it all that day. I followed it some on the internet, but I couldn't just sit there and watch it replayed constantly. I think it almost seemed less real or harder to believe this time watching it than when it was happening that day, because that day it was mind-boggling.
Right.
But to watch it back and to even really comprehend that had happened, I think was almost harder, I don't know, the second time around for me. But again, this is something that it's such a political topic that you definitely put yourself on the hot seat, by taking this kind of a subject on. Do you think there's any kind of political agenda behind the show, one way or the other? That it's sympathetic or anti, or that is it politically correct, or is it unpolitically correct, or
No, I think it's a raw, realistic look at something that's happening right now, that's on our minds. The one really compelling thing about it is that sort of the lead, the protagonist, the star, the hero, is a black American Muslim FBI agent working undercover, and we get to really see his side of his experience as a member of the society here in the United States, as a Muslim, practicing Muslim, and also as someone who is adamantly opposed to this kind of hatred, this kind of manipulation of his faith, and so on and so forth. So in that regard, there's not so much as an agenda, but there is a perspective that I think is new, it's exciting, and I don't know that it's been seen before on American television. And I know that the writers, creators are aware of that, and they're very proud of that, and they're excited. They've been excited to bring it to fruition, and the second season just sort of builds on that in a lot of ways.
I know that the show's been nominated for the Golden Globe and
Yes.
other awards.
The first season it was, that's right.
What's the reaction been from the Muslim community? Have they?
There's a great deal of support. Locally in Los Angeles, the Islamic Center in Los Angeles is a very important center here in Los Angeles, but also nationally, and they've been very supportive, but not just a green light to do whatever. They're very interested and have been helpful as a resource for information, and critical when they felt that they needed to be, or sensitive to the portrayal. But I would say that all in all, what I know, and I wasn't directly involved with that, is that they've been very supportive of it. The internet's amazing. The blogosphere is full of commentary on it, and one don't have to look too far to get any range of opinions.
What kind of comments do you see out there?
I've just seen a lot of I've seen a lot of really positive comments, so I can't say, but I think that I'm sure that you don't have to go too far to find someone who has something hopefully constructive but critical to say. But I haven't read any. I think in general the response has been really, really positive, in part because I think it's good entertainment, it's good storytelling, and it's compelling information, and it isn't, I don't think, exploitative of the situation. It's just informative. And I think people have responded positively because of that.
Do your personal politics matter to you when you're playing the role? I mean, do they help you or hinder you? I mean, do you have to agree or disagree politically with the character?
No.
So you're able to make that distinction that,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it'd be a difficult task to I wouldn't get as much work if I decided to
be in the same political
to be
party
the
as
same
all the
exactly,
constituents, yeah.
be a card-carrying member. But no, I mean it's usually really interesting when there's something new to learn about a person and a perspective to adopt a perspective for a period of time that's completely different than mine. I think it's fascinating. It's what I really enjoy.
Okay, we'll be right back with Henri Lubatti from Sleeper Cell. We are back with Henri Lubatti from Sleeper Cell. Well, before the interview, we had talked a bit, and you said, you know, that you didn't really want to talk about your own personal politics a lot, and I'm not trying to pin you down on that, but I thought it was very interesting because in general, for instance, I just interviewed someone, well, I'll say who it was because he's very outspoken about this, Eric Braeden from The Young and the Restless, whose publicist, by the way, beforehand told me he's very political and loves to talk about politics. But I think it's interesting, let's say the relationship between art and politics, because you want to keep that private and personal, but I think of someone like Barbra Streisand, who is very political, and where I'm going with this is she had that concert recently where she was making political statements before the concert, and people were heckling her in the audience. I mean, you know, I think she was, you know, very making left-wing comments, and the Republicans who went to see her show were, you know, upset and were shouting out. And finally, she told them to, you know, well, I don't know if it was a hand gesture, but she gave him that word, I think, to, you know, shut the blank up. And do you think that's appropriate for an artist? Should you be, let's say if you go to see the symphony, do you want to hear the conductor's politics before every time you go to the symphony? Or when you go to the opera, do you want to know what the lead singer's politics are? Or should people shut up? Meaning the artist.
Oh no, I think it's appropriate for any individual or citizen in this country and anywhere in the world to, you know, say what they want to say and feel comfortable to say it, and to be political, especially those that have a forum to really address a mass audience. I think that they have a responsibility, perhaps even a greater responsibility, and if they choose to exercise it, then that would be great. Whether I personally want to go to the symphony and hear the conductor speak on behalf of her or his personal political opinion, I don't know. I would say no on most occasions. I'm excited to hear the music and to hear the symphony play. And I don't know that that would make any sense. But having said that, I think that an individual like Barbra Streisand has been politically active on a number of occasions, and I don't think it should come as any surprise to anyone who would attend one of her concerts. So perhaps that's a different context, and you have to weigh that when you go to see a show like that, as opposed to simply it might be a, you know, Vesa-Pekka Salonen just suddenly turned around and talked. It might be a big surprise, and we might not really know where we're going. But it could also be a really interesting evening at the concert.
Well, certainly if you agree with you, you'd probably love it, right? I mean,
you
know, the Democrats were cheering and the Republicans were booing or whatever.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But no, it's definitely a personal choice, and I think that those that exercise it really need to be able to do it, and I think that those that want people to not do it are expressing an opinion just like anyone else, and it's not one that I share, but yeah.
Well, I personally, you know, again, I agree with you that, you know, certainly anyone in America has the right to speak publicly about their political life. You know, whether or not you should give them special consideration because they're, let's say, a celebrity, I don't know. I mean, I personally wouldn't, to be honest. There was a saying from the ancient Greeks that it's not who says it, but what they say. And I think for me, so granted, you know, they can use their platform and say it, but I think as, you know, the listener, you have to decide whether or not their celebrity status would give them, you know, special worth in your mind. But yet, again, I would personally I would hope there could be maybe they could do it outside the concert or outside their performance, and, you know, not have it just become a soapbox every time you go to see.
Right.
Because, well, you know, here's the thing, you know, in this country everything's left and right. You know, you know that half the audience is going to not be on the same page no matter what you say. So I don't know.
Sometimes it's nice to just sit back and hear the music, or
right,
watch the play, or see the movie, or, you know, exactly. No, I completely agree. I mean, I don't.
Because whether or not you agree with her politics, I mean, certainly she's a great singer, and there, you know, there are people in the other political party who might admire her singing, but not like.
I worked real hard to get that ticket, so you kind of want to hear all the music.
Sure,
I can understand that.
Well, the other thing about this series that occurred to me when I was getting ready for the show, I thought, you know, there is only one way this series can end, I think, is with a big bang somewhere, right? I mean, this is, or at least that's where they're trying to head with it. So whenever your final, I wish you well, you're going into your second season, and if you go for 10 more seasons. But sooner or later, we're headed toward the big ending, because, well, not to make light of it, but your character is basically a suicide bomber, so I'm assuming it's headed in one direction.
Success means I look for another job.
Yeah, I thought, you know, this is one series where they're really going to like put themselves out of business. Well, of course, I guess there's always another sleeper cell, but you know, but they really.
For better or worse, that's right. There's never, there doesn't seem to be a shortage right now of this, of people to replace it. So in that sense, I think that they do have that, they realize that, and so there is a future in terms of the way this story is developing. And there's a lot more, I think, that they can delve into in terms of how this struggle is exercised, the war on terror, et cetera. It's really fascinating.
Well, it was a pleasure to have you here today. This is Henri Lubatti from Sleeper Cell. You can watch it on Showtime. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.
So you have to rush off to an event.
So we'll